everyone. Welcome back to ESBR Boxing's YouTube channel. Delighted as always to be joined by Danny. This is a short preview video about Andy Cruz's debut, which is happening this Saturday in Detroit on the Matchroom cards. Danny, thanks for joining me. There's been a lot of hype about Andy Cruz. Obviously, achieved fantastic things as an amateur. He's obviously kind of not a young. I think he's about to turn 28 as well, so he's not a young man. How pumped are you for this guy's debut and seeing what he can do in a ring?
Well, I'm not a million miles away from 28, mate, and I'm still a young man, so I don't know what you're all about. Yeah, really excited. As you say, there's been a lot of hype since he announced that he was signing with Matchroom. Look, I'm not going to profess to watch every Andy Cruz amateur fight, which I feel as if a lot of people on social media sort of claim as if they're doing. As you mentioned, his achievements are like ridiculous. I've watched a few highlights of him in the amateurs. That's as far as I'll say I've watched, and looks to be a really talented fighter. And you look at some of the names he's beat in the amateur ranks, and I know it's very different, transitioning over to professional, but really exciting. And I think, as you touched on, coming into when you're becoming 28, you really want to be like late. You're leaving it sort of late if you go any later than that. So they'll have to move him quickly, and judging by the debut opponent, which I'm sure we're going to come on to, that's exactly what they intend to do. So yeah, really excited for it.
Yeah, I think one of the highlights of him as an amateur won a gold medal at the Tokyo Olympics, beating none other than Keyshawn Davis in the Olympic final. So you're not a bad fight if you're beating him, whether it's as an amateur as a professional. How quickly do you think this guy is going to get moved, Danny? I think, as you mentioned, look, he's not a young man, not an old man, but if this guy is going to be fighting for world titles, how quickly do you think it can happen?
See, this is always what sort of comes up when like a top amateur turns over professional, like the sort of debate amongst fans about how quickly they're going to move him. It's just going to depend on how he looks and how quickly he adapts to being a professional. Like, you can't sit here and say like he's going to do a Lomachenko and fight for a world title in a second fight. At the same time, if he looks really good and moves, makes short work of Burgos on Saturday, which would be a real statement. Burgos never been stopped. If he was to stop Burgos on Saturday, you'd have to say, look, we can afford to jump a few steps and get him towards maybe world title eliminators level in like 4 or 5 fights. But again, if he struggles, if it's a close fight, obviously, if he loses, that'll be a catastrophe. Then they're going to have to sort of pump the brakes on the hype a bit. So it depends. Again, I'm not like an ABA coach. I'm not a good enough judge of like how his attributes will necessarily translate to being a professional to say like, oh, he's going to be a unified world champion by his 7th fight. So we'll see how he looks.
Yeah, look, we're not going to get too carried away. I think I don't want to say too much before his debut. I think one thing that's important to note as well is there are some people who are amazing amateurs but aren't amazing pros.
Exactly.
That's definitely a possibility here. So it's important not to get too carried away. Juan Carlos Burgos, 35-7 with 3 draws, made his debut back in 2004. 35 years old. His last fight was against Keyshawn Davis, which over 8 rounds, lost every round, but still went the distance. As you mentioned, he's never been stopped. Faced Devin Haney back in 2018, faced Mikey Garcia back in 2014, went the distance with both of them. And yeah, he's got some kind of other good names on his record as well. So very experienced, never been stopped. Just thoughts on Burgos as a debut opponent for Andy Cruz, Danny?
Yeah, really, really solid debut opponent for all the reasons you mentioned. As I was saying to you before we started recording, I remember that Keyshawn Davis fight, and he took some serious shots. Like it was obviously a complete whitewash on the scorecard, but it was like a really brutal sort of beating he took, to be honest. And like, you've seen fights stop for less just because of I think soft stoppages are getting softer nowadays, which could be a good thing. But at no point did he look like, was he actually hurt or buzzed or looked like being knocked down. He just like ate shot after shot. So really, really tough. And one thing as well, he can clearly punch a bit. Like he's got, I think, like maybe 21 of the 30 something wins or something like that have come by stoppage. And a lot of the times with these fighters, they'll like top amateurs or, you know, big prospects or whatever, they'll put them in with fighters with a decent record, but you'll look and they can't punch at all. And that's sort of like an indication where it's like a no lose, like, because we can just sort of job them in the scorecards if it goes late. Whereas a puncher, there's always a risk. And as you say, a lot of amateurs, when they turn over sort of top amateurs, they can struggle in the early fights. Like Robeisy Ramirez obviously lost his debut, and he was a very esteemed Cuban amateur as well. So this is a really sort of solid opponent and a good yardstick. And obviously the upside, if he stops him, like you can really put the hype train into overdrive if he becomes the first man to stop Burgos. So yeah, good solid opponent, definitely. And one that makes sense as well with the whole Sean Davis narrative, where you can say, "Oh, look, we've beat him better than Keyshawn," which, as I say, would be a big statement.
Yeah, just final question from me, Danny. I think that Eddie Hearn made comments about wanting Sean Davis on Andy Cruz's debut. Can imagine that that's obviously not happening. Didn't go down well. They faced each other a number of times in the amateurs. One of those fights being that final in Tokyo. Thoughts on that fight happening in the future? You know, just obviously Sean Davis, still undefeated pro, is impressed as a professional so far. Yeah, just do you think that could happen anytime soon?
Not too sure, you know, because obviously amongst the likes of me and you and sort of bigger boxing fans, you know the narrative of their history in the Olympics, but Andy Cruz to the wider public is not a name at all. And if you're top rank and you've got potentially one of the best prospects in boxing in Keyshawn Davis, like why are you going to put him in with Andy Cruz? Like someone who's got the best of him in the amateurs, who's older, who's had more amateur fights. And like what's the upside to that? Don't get me wrong, if they become world champions and Matchroom do a solid job of promoting Andy Cruz, which I do think will be difficult. Like Cuban amateurs traditionally, who have, even those who have done really well, have not really become massive names in the professional game. So I think they've got a job on their hands in promoting them to the point where he becomes commercially viable for those fights. Obviously, if Keyshawn becomes a world champion and he becomes a mandatory, then again, that's, I mean, you're looking way down in the future. But I don't think if you're top rank, you'll be dying to give Andy Cruz a shot at Keyshawn Davis, to be honest.
Yeah, look, you'll see. Sean Davis is, I think, worth noting, quite a bit younger than Andy Cruz. He's only 8-0. I think if you consider when some of those amateur fights happened, there could have been a difference of, say, one being 21, one being 17 at those sort of age. That's quite a big gap.
Yeah.
So we'll see if it happens. I don't personally think it's going to happen for at least a couple of years, but we'll see. You never know. You never know. Danny, thanks for your time as always. Looking forward to this one. The debut of Andy Cruz is, yeah, it's been a bit of a long one in the making. Some people kind of know more about him than others. But yeah, he's fighting this Saturday night on DAZN. And yeah, looking forward to catching up with you after the fight.
Cheers, mate. Thanks.